Well, happy Thursday afternoon to everybody. Thank you for being here. Welcome to the Church Facility Management Solutions webinar on budgeting in the church. My name is Nathan Parr. You see me, I'm that little guy there on the left side of your screen. I'm a facility specialist with Cool Solutions Group, and I'll be kind of moderating the event today, the webinar. Just some housekeeping things. Hopefully everybody can hear me and do just well. But if at any time during the presentation, if you have a question on your little control panel there from GoToWebinar, there's a box that you can type in a question and send it to us. We'll be sure to watch for those, get those answered. So feel free anytime, raise your hand or ask a little question in the box and we'll do that. We'll try to leave ample time for questions. We're also going to have a couple active and live polls going on during the webinar. So be watching for those and participate. It'll pop up on your screen and you just click the answer and we'll get some real-time data from everybody in attendance as to what they say. So again, my name is Nathan Parr. Welcome. And I'd like to introduce Mr. Rick Cadden to you. He is our special speaker today. And Rick, if you wouldn't mind, just go ahead and say hi to everybody and tell them a little bit about yourself and who you are.
Thank you, Nathan. This is awesome. Thank you all for participating. I'm at First Baptist Church in Burleson, Texas, and I've been in church business administration for about 25 years, but I've spent a lot of time in facility management, not by choice, but you get into these big facilities that are big and old, and they just need a lot of work, so I've kind of just learned along the way about how to do that, and same thing in budgeting. So I'm looking forward to answering questions and hopefully sharing some good information this morning.
All right, awesome. Thank you. So like it says, we will have a slide deck going and we'll show some slides. After the presentation, you'll get a response email thanking you for attending. And if you would like the slide deck or some more information, feel free to respond back to us and we will definitely get that to you. So we'll just go right on to the first slide here and let's just jump right in it. We're going to go into church budgeting and keep in mind this is kind of a 30,000 foot view on a lot of different things. But again, ask your questions if you want something specific or a little more in depth in an area. We'll be glad to do that. So Rick, I'll kind of let you take it on and we'll start the show.
All right. Thanks, Nathan. Yes, go to the next slide there. I'm going to throw out a statement and see what you guys think about it. I did this in my staff meeting the other day, but budgets have no cash value. When you hear that statement, it's kind of interesting, but what I mean by that is the cash is in the bank. The cash isn't in the budget. The budget is really just a guideline for us in our financial stewardship. So I like to throw that out just to kind of get some comments. When I did that in our staff meeting, they were a little puzzled, but then it helps me in my budgeting. That the cash is really in the bank. And so what it forces us to do with that philosophy is we have to communicate to our staff what is the cash position of the church so that they know how to use their budget. I've run into that many times where the staff members get their budget and they think, well, that's how much money I have for the year. Really, that's true, but it also ties in directly to your cash position. If you're doing very well on giving, then yeah, your budget's probably at 100%. But what if your cash was a little low and you needed to rein in the spending a little bit? So just like to throw that out. You may want to type in some comments or chat on that. Just like to get your input. But really, budgets are just a guideline for us spending.
So let me just throw something out there, just make sure. So as we're talking and we're thinking budgets, it's important, in your opinion, then to be very clear the difference between cash on hand, actual able to be spent versus what we want to spend or feel led to spend through the year. Correct?
Exactly. I ran into that many times, and in fact, we're right in the middle of our budget process. We're September through August, and they look at their line items in their budget and they think, well, I've got this much money to spend this year, so I'm really good as long as I don't spend over that. But really and truly, if you don't communicate the cash position of the church, you may want to say, well, you really can't spend all of that right now because we're trying to hold things back a little bit. It's just a communication. between the staff and yourself.
Okay. All right. No questions or comments so far. We ready to move next?
Yes. The what I wanted to cover is just the budget process. This may help you in that. So here's what I do, Nathan, is I like to kind of create a timeline. I like to spend some time on the budget, obviously, and I've got 5 areas there. And for example, in our budget, ours is going to start September 1, so we're already in the process, and you can see I have a 5-month process to get us through that. So the first one, like this month in April, is our prep time. And what I mean by that is to prep is we're looking at budget histories, we're looking at trends, maybe even over the last 5 to 10 years of where we've been on our budget. And so I use the first month of really just prepping our staff, prepping the finance committee, trustees or elders if you use, and just spending that time to get them ready for budgets. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in that prep time when you're looking at your history and trends, do you, as a church or as an individual, do you also take into account what's going on in your community, giving trends, or what may be going on in the world to try to balance what you're going to budget versus what may be available?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great point. We do. We look at economy, we look at what's happening, what we can't predict the future, but what's coming up. And we also look at in our trends, in our histories, we kind of look at major events that have happened in the church. Maybe you built a new building 4 or 5 years ago. You know, how did that work in giving and attendance? Maybe you had a pastor change, just different major events. And then also what's going on in your community. Good point.
Okay.
The next thing I do is I start building the budget is I know many of you already use these, but I try to provide a budget worksheet to each of the staff members that are overseeing their departments or budgets. And I give them that as a worksheet, but it also tells them some information. It tells them what their annual budget is currently. And then just for reference only, I give them what their expenses for each line item is up to date. I don't want them to just copy and say, okay, well, I'm just going to go up 10% or I'm going to keep it the same. But I wanted to give that to them for a reference. So the next step or next month I use is just building the budget. Everybody's putting together their budgets and submitting their worksheets.
Okay, that brings up a good question, because I do get asked this a few times. So when they're looking at what they've already spent, and you said you don't necessarily want them to just arbitrarily do a percentage. Do you go back to like a zero-based budget, or do you? Because I know there's a difference between zero-based budgeted versus historical budgeting and a few things. What's your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. They always ask me that. I kind of throw it out as a hybrid. What I tell them to do is they're really putting together a ministry budget. Is in the age group ministries I want them to look at what they're wanting to accomplish in their ministry. For instance, in student ministry, let's say, what do they want to accomplish? What do they want to do? And that may be different than this year or the last year. And so I want them to be proactive and say, what do I need to accomplish? What do I want to do? And then put some dollars to that. What do you think it's going to cost you to accomplish that ministry or that program or that project? So it is kind of starting at zero. Some things, may stay the same, like curriculum and materials. They pretty well know what they're going to spend. But for camps and trips and that kind of stuff, I like them to be a little proactive.
Okay, thank you.
The next one is just in review. Once the budget's built and all the worksheets come in, then that's what my job is, to compile all that, enter it into our whatever software we use, ACS or Shelby or whatever. And so I enter that all in, and that gives us our budget number, and it gives us what everybody has submitted. So the next 2 steps is really fine-tuning it. So we want to review everything, and in our church we've got the finance committee, personnel committee, probably similar to other churches, elders or trustees, whoever the groups are that oversees your budget, then I want to give that to them and give them plenty of time to review it, look through it line by line, and maybe even ask questions, of big increases or even big decreases.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Do you find that in that review process that is it very circular where you'll see it, they'll review it and then send it back? And if so, how often do you see that working? How is it healthy to have lots of checking it out, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a good question. I encourage that. I want it to be a real thorough budget where a lot of people have looked at it. So yeah, if the committees get it and they've got questions, they may even want to send it back to a certain department and say, hey, you really went way up on your department. We need some justification. I don't really ask for that from the staff members. Their worksheets is really just submitting dollar amounts. But I always tell them, if you're going to go up on a big amount on a line item, you need to be ready to justify that. Or if you cut a program or you decrease, just be ready to justify. So make notes, keep those handy, and if the committee comes back and asks you certain questions, then you'll be more prepared to give them a good answer. But yeah, I like it to go round and round a little bit, and just ask questions. And I always tell them, feel free to ask any questions that you have for it.
Okay.
All the way through the elders, trustees, or whatever committees that you use.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. The next one is, so by that time you've got your budget compiled and the staff have submitted it, you're reviewing it, then that gives us about 20 or 30 days to make all the adjustments, get it re-entered into the system, and then now you've kind of come to the point where we've got a pretty good idea of what the proposed budget's going to be. And so the next month for me would be July. It goes back through the same committees, but it's the adjusted budget. I guess if you're really lucky and there wasn't any changes or anything, then you'd be better off. But I always allow some time for that to happen. So the approval time, if they're going back through the budget and they're seeing it now as the final stage, then I'm asking the committees and the groups that look at it to put their stamp on it and say, yeah, this is the proposed budget. So the approval time is real similar to review, except they're putting the final stamp on it.
Okay, doing that final. Okay, we've made the adjustments. We've had the conversations. We've done the comparative analysis that we need to do. Everything's open, but okay, now here's the final proposal.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. So if everything goes as planned, and I'm trying to think, Nathan, I was actually at one church where it took a lot more work. There was a lot more adjustments, but if I remember right, we were making some large cuts into the budget. And so in the review and approval time, especially in the approval, I would just say be flexible. You may want to add some extra meetings. You may have to have an extra finance meeting or an extra personnel meeting or even trustees. It may be 2 meetings that month. So I always tell them up front, hey, be ready to help me schedule an extra meeting to get this all the way through. So by August, my last step, present and vote, I really want to have that budget done. It's printed. It's the preliminary budget, and we're ready to roll. And so the 1st of August is when I would get that out to the church in a printed format or even on our website.
Okay.
Any avenue that we have to get it out to the church would be really good.
All right, both. So, and I think that's important to note. A lot of people are migrating. I mean, we're here. We're all here virtually. We're all participating electronically, and we're doing that, and we're comfortable. But not everybody in your church may be comfortable with that or have accessibility that makes that available. So, definitely get it out on your electronic means that you have, but also go ahead and have paper copies, both executive summaries, if you will, plus full budgets for people to look through and get their hands on.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've probably everybody that's listening here has been through this process. Is how do you present it to the church? What all do you present? And I've kind of been caught off guard a few times where I didn't print as much detail as what they wanted.
Right.
A lot of church members, some of them want a lot of detail. What I found to be successful for me is just what you just said. Is I print a detailed line by line budget. It's our whole budget. Now we don't put salaries. We lump those together. In our personnel budget, it'll just say compensation or whatever. We don't list them out in detail, but I want to give them a detailed line by line item, and then I give them a summary of that, of just the department totals. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so you may have 7 or 8, 9, 10 departments. So I summarize it. Some of them just want that. They just want to know what the departments are and the total. A lot of them just want the total. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Now,
and see if you went up real big or went down. So I print both of those and have some copies in the church office maybe. And then I also post those on our website where they could actually download them and print them if they wanted to. Right. Okay. I'm trying to get to the point where we're transparent a little, enough to satisfy them. But I print and then I put it on our website, and then we have some even around the church if maybe in some of the foyers or stuff. But I don't print a lot of copies, but there are some that are going to want to pick up one.
Sure.
Right.
Yep. Some people like to, and right. I think if I ask the question, does anybody know somebody in a church that wants to see all the details when it comes to budget? I think everybody would be able to raise their hands at this point.
Yeah, they want to see down to salaries and everything, but I don't show that.
Right. No, we don't show data that is protected by law.
Right. I just don't know. And I always, over the years, Nathan, I've had maybe 1 or 2 people that want to see salaries. And I always tell them, I say, I'll show it to you, but you're going to, make an appointment with me, come by the office, and we'll sit down together and look at it. And I always stay up front. What's your motivation? Right. What are you really looking for? So, but I've only had maybe 2 people in these years that have come in and asked for that personal. So, okay. So that's by that time you're presenting it. We do 2 presentations to the church. We do a Sunday and then we do a Wednesday night. We do a town hall meeting where anybody's welcome to come. Our trustees actually present our budget and ask for the vote for that. So we spend all of August. We spend 3 or 4 Sundays promoting it, printing it, getting it out to the church way ahead of time. So when they get down to where we're asking them to vote, they've had plenty of opportunity to look in detail and ask questions, right?
Right. So.
All right, that's the process. The next slide there, if you want to move on, is just some, this is 2 key metrics that I really have found super helpful in tracking in our budget. And the first one is just, these are obvious though, but is the receipts to budget. And I put on that, your target here is for your receipts, obviously, to be 100% or greater than your budget. We always want to take in more than our budget. That'd be awesome, right?
Right. That's the goal.
That's the goal. And then the next one is, your expenses to receipts. I've had different philosophies on this, but mine is, I want to do the best I can to not spend more than we take in at the end of the year. I'd like to have a surplus. I'm sure everybody listening would want the same, right?
Right. And
so you want that to be less than 100%. I mean, if your expenses are 90% of what your receipts, then you got a 10% surplus. That's a win. So those 2 key metrics I track. I track every week, in fact, and it's really helped us to monitor our budget and know where we're at. So the goal for me at the end of the year is for my receipts to budget to be over 100%, and my expenses to receipts to be under 100%. So by what I do, Nathan, is what I found helpful is I have a little spreadsheet that we track these with, And we do this every week. Every week we're seeing what our expenses were for the week and how much did we take in on Sunday. And I show that to our finance team. I actually email that to them every week. And then when we meet once a month, we look at that and we look at those two percentages and see where we're at. It's a great guide, right?
Right. So it's keeping it in the front, and you're paying attention. And I think that's a great point, that
Right.
just because it's budgeted doesn't mean you have to spend it.
Right.
I know my time working and budgeted, that sometimes people think if you don't use it, you'll lose it. But it is, if it's surplus, and I think we're going to get into that a little later, but surpluses are great as you start maybe funding your life cycle or capital improvement accounts, and then be able to, if you have any surplus at the end of the year, put percentages away for, they're going to be coming some life cycle costs. So.
Right, exactly. So that's just two good percentages that I would suggest that you track and you look. And then during the year, it gives you a great picture of where you're headed. How are you doing? You don't want to be caught 2 or 3 months out of the end of your budget and go, you know what, we're upside down.
Right.
And then too late to change.
Right. And we've just had a question about, could we share an example of that spreadsheet? And I don't know if you have one available, but would you be willing to, after this, help me or send me a copy, not obviously with all your data in it, but a copy that then we could share out on the Church Facility Management Solutions resources?
Yes, absolutely. I have those. Okay. I've used those in other sessions, and I'll be glad to share that.
Okay. So y'all heard that. A lot of these examples, we'll track the questions for those of you who are requesting, and we will upload examples to the web resources section on the website.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's a common question in relating to this is what do we do when we overspend our receipts and at the year and we end up with negative cash flow? I've had that happen, and I've had people ask that same question on that next slide. That's the question. So I've got a couple of answers for that, but maybe we can do a quick poll about one of the solutions to that is having a reserve account, just in case, and if you go in the negative at the end of the year. So be interested to throwing out a poll and just asking about a reserve account. I always say that you should have somewhere between 5 to 7% of your total budget in a reserve account.
Okay. So for those of you tracking here and seeing, if you wouldn't mind just giving us some answers, either and we're collecting the responses, let us know, or shoot us a line.
I'd like to know that.
Absolutely. Once I close the poll, we'll share all the data with everyone. So you give the 5 to 7%. Is that based on current budget, or are there other factors that you would base that 5 to 7? I know it says total budget in the reserve account. So is that going to change each year, or do you kind of set consistent goals?
That's a great question. That's kind of our benchmark, I guess, which it is based on the current budget. Typically, or hopefully, your budget's increasing a little bit each year. But if you had a year where you had to really cut your budget, I would say it's just the total budget of the current year would be a good guide.
Okay. So take that year, and then do you, on your reserve account, do you do anything like do you make it a restricted account, or how difficult or how easy do you make it to pull funds out?
That's a great question. What I've done is, it is a restricted account. It's a board restricted account, and I've always placed that the staff and finance team are the ones that control that. So if we had to use money out of the reserve, it would have to go through the finance or the stewardship committee. and they would have to be in agreement for that. It can't be a staff member just spending money out of it. That seems to be sufficient accountability that the staff could present an issue if it was a large emergency. On one of the next slides, it'll just show a couple of things that I found have been really good for reserve accounts.
Okay.
But you do need some accountability, I think, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's because reserve is not a slush fund or a rainy day
Right.
gee, we overspend or I always look at reserves. Now I'm obviously geared toward the facility side, but I think of reserve as reserve for stuff we've got to fix that are big, mission critical.
Right.
So we do have a question here. It says, are we referring to an operating budget reserve or a capital reserve? And
that's a good question. I've always had it as an operational reserve.
Okay.
Although I guess if you had the 5 to 7, that's a pretty good amount that you could probably use that for some capital stuff. But it's primarily an operational reserve.
Okay.
That's a good question. Okay, let's see. So,
and here
that's awesome. Look at that, 5 to 7, 55%.
Yep. 2 to 4%, and then
right.
18. Only 18 or not.
Yeah, that's some good numbers, Nathan. I think.
Yeah, that's real good. Well, because these are all engaged members on CFMS, so they're rocking it.
Good job, everybody. Good job. Well, the next slide, I give you 3 things, so it may answer your question. Is when you create and build a reserve fund, I guess you need to establish that up front of what are you gonna have the reserve fund for. But my number one is it was to relieve negative cash flow, and the other one is to satisfy large insurance deductibles. And I can briefly talk about that, or to cover, like you said, unexpected large emergencies. And that could be a breakdown in equipment, or it could be anything. It could be the pastor's been out for 3 months, and giving is low, or it could be a multiple of those 3. But so I guess to me it's mostly an operational budget. What I found real successful at one church I was at is we had a large reserve. We had the 5 to 7% reserve fund, and so at the end of each year, if we had a surplus, if we underspent our receipts, that reserve or that surplus would go over to our reserve account, right? And it would help build that up. And then if another year, if we were in the red for whatever reason, we ended up with a negative cash flow, then we pulled money from that reserve over into our operating account. So we basically zeroed out at the end of each month. At the end of each year.
Okay.
So we were either pulling money out or putting money back into that reserve account. It relieved a lot of the stress of if you did go in the red, which we obviously don't want to do. But if you do, then you have some reserve to cover that. Does that make sense?
Right. Yes. So in even easier terms, admittedly somewhat simplistic, it almost operates as your savings account. Your operating budget is your checking account, and your savings account is this reserve account that, like you said, if you're overdrawn 1 month, you pull money from your savings. If you've got extra, you put it in there so you've got enough to cover what's coming up.
I'll give you a good example. In our reserve fund at one church, we did have a large facility need that we needed for some HVAC, and it was presented to the committee. Sorry about that. And so the committee had to look back and said, well, let's look at the last 5 years and at our negative cash flow. What's the largest amount that we've needed to cover ourselves with? And so to approve that large facility need, they wanted to make sure it wasn't going to get the funds so low that we couldn't offset any negative cash flow. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Kind of just balance that out. So it's really just a balance. But you're right. It's like your home budget. You have your checking account, and then hopefully you have a savings account. If you're a Dave Ramsey fan, and he's going to say, "Hey, you need to have 6 months reserve over there sitting there for emergencies."
Right. And that leads me into kind of my next question as we talk about reserves. 5 to 7% is a target for a budget, but is there an operational number that you could also use or maybe use instead or in addition of 2 to 3 months operational costs, like what it would cost to pay salaries, insurance, keep the lights on, pay the bills?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, we've talked about that on some of our committees where they want about a 3 month bills, and they would use that as their benchmark for reserve. That's a good point. So I guess you could do both. You could use that and maybe the 5 to 7%. You got to have some kind of reserve and some benchmark to shoot for. You obviously don't need too much in reserve to offset your negative cash flow.
Right. And I would say if
you could actually have too much in there.
Yeah, well, and if you're in a situation where you're always having to pull to offset negative, then you might want to reassess how you've done the budgeting. Go back to the first slide.
Well, yeah, you got to look at that for sure.
Okay.
So moving on in the one of the other things that I'm big on budgeting is just probably everybody listening has heard these percentages, but it's talking about a balanced budget or a healthy budget. And I'm going to throw out just these percentages as my guide. I've used these for 20 years. And I know if you pulled articles off the internet or talked to other people, they're a little different. But for the sake of just training, I've always tried to keep the personnel, the two balances you want to balance are the personnel cost and your debt load. And I've always said that personnel needs to be between 40 to 50% of your budget. Some of them say 45 to 55. It's close. And that your debt load should be between 20 and 30 of your total budget. And the key for me is just that both of those together shouldn't exceed 70% of your budget. And I've certainly talked to other people in other churches where they've been out of balance for that. And it's really, I give you at the bottom of that slide, it just says, what happens is if you get your personnel budget too high, if it's 60 or 70%, which sounds crazy, but there are some churches with that, then you have no capacity to borrow money or to grow in your facilities, right? And if you're so loaded down in debt, if your debt's real high, then you don't have any personnel budget to hire and to grow your staff. So there is a balance to that, and I've looked at that at every church I've served at, and I've used that as kind of a guideline. So does that make sense? The key
does.
is not to be over 70% for both of them.
One thing I want to ask and kind of point out there is, as we talk about our debt load, immediately I think everybody thinks of, we've borrowed money, we have to make payments, that's debt, because we all are familiar with that. Would you consider, and again, this is me coming from the operations side, operational costs, the somewhat fixed costs that you will have every month, would that be included in that debt load? Because you have to pay it to keep the doors open.
Yes.
And it's a somewhat fixed cost. So would you include that in that 20 to 30% as you're trying to balance your budget?
Yes, I would. And some people go either way, but I would say yes. Your fixed operational cost, I would say you can include that in there.
Okay, so that
you'd have to really, because like you said, they're fixed. You're going to pay them.
Right.
Your utilities and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no matter, unless you're in that weird part of the country that it stays 68 degrees year round with no humidity or anything else.
I wish I was in that. That'd be great.
You're probably going to be running the AC in the summer and the heater in the winter. So, those are things you are going to pay those bills. You need lights. If you're going to have a facility, these are fixed costs. Okay. So
that's true. You could maybe change that to operational, but that would include that. So
Okay.
yeah, I would be interested if can we throw the poll out and say, does anybody that's on here know your personnel percentage and do you know your percentages? Maybe we can get some input there.
All right, there you go. Notice everyone, we did not ask for the salaries of anybody.
Right.
So we're not asking for that. But what percentage of your total budget? I can tell you one of the last facilities and budgets that I looked at for a church, their personnel budget was 55.
Yeah.
And there was compelling reasons. They had multiple programs that required a high level of staff, but not high salaried levels. I guess that makes sense. A lot of workers. So
yeah, I've seen that. I mean, ours right now at our church is like right at 55%. You're right, but our debt and operational load is low. We're still not over the 70%.
Okay, and so that's kind of your wiggle room then. If you're using this balancing percentage of 70%, if your fixed operational costs and your personnel costs aren't exceeding that 70, while the personnel may be higher, as long as that total ratio or percentage is not exceeded, you've probably got pretty good budget.
Yeah, you're okay. I think that's the key. I really do, because you're going to go over. There's certain circumstances where you may go over. If you have really low debt and your operations is really low, then you have some room to add to your personnel budget, and that may be used for a time of growth. You may be in a facility that you're not going to have to build anything, in the future. You got a lot of square footage. They're in good shape. Then the church is growing. They may want to spend that extra money on personnel just to get going and hire the right staff. Does that make sense? So there are some combinations like that.
Okay, and from our responders and the folks that answered, this is our results. So nice. 22% between 30 and 40%, and 78% greater than 40, which
normal.
That's what I've seen.
Yeah, 30 and 40 would be awesome. That's good stuff. Yeah, I think people are watching that. It's been out there for quite a while, those guidelines. And like I said, they vary a little bit depending on who you talk to. But I think you got to watch those. And as you get into your budgeting, just keep watching those percentages and make sure that you don't get out of whack.
Okay.
So that next slide, I kind of just gave some real quick scenarios just to emphasize, not more than the 70%. Like we were talking about, it does give you a little bit of a wiggle room for that. So I just threw that out. You can have all different combinations. Now, obviously, the 50-20, is a good one. They're all really good. You just have to watch those two percentages really close, I believe.
Okay, and make sure that, again, this is my experience, my opinion. Make sure you're taking into consideration those fixed operational costs. Don't let that get pushed aside.
Right.
Because you can make your budget look really good and your scenarios really good if you neglect to add certain information.
Right. Yeah. So. Good. All right. The other question that I've had, and this is just monitoring the budget, and I wanted to talk briefly on that. It was during the years. How do you watch and what do you look for? I'll see if I can explain this. Within our budgets, we have a lot of line items within a department. Just for instance, in properties or facilities, I have a lot of line items, and then I have a total for properties, and everybody's got their department full of line items, and then you have the total budget numbers. So you have three numbers really. You have a line item amount, you have a department amount, and then you have the total budget. And all I wanted to say on this, Nathan, is I try to be real flexible with our staff members, and I'll give them the flexibility though within their line items. So if they have 20 line items in their department, then they can underspend or overspend within those line items depending on what happens during that year. Because once you budget, things change during the year, right? Ministries change, projects change. So I give them some flexibility, but what I tell them is that your department total is don't go over that. If you get $40,000 for your properties, well, you'd have more than that hopefully, but you see what I'm saying is that you don't want to spend more than your department budget, but you can overspend or underspend within your department.
Right. So you have flexibility within the individual line items to shift,
Yeah.
or you give them flexibility to shift percentages or totals between
Yeah.
those individual lines within the department, with the understanding that overall it is not to exceed 100%.
Yeah, exactly. When I got, I've only been on staff here for 6 months, and that was the prior philosophy, is that there was no flexibility within your line items. If you budgeted $500 for something, then you don't spend more than $500. And it really hamstrung a lot of the ministry, and things that would change during the year, and they go, I'm going to have more money than that. And they'd go, in the past, they'd go, no, that's all you get. Well, my philosophy say, yeah, overspend that, but then you need to underspend somewhere else to make up for it.
Right.
And I'm just looking at the department total. So it gives them a little flexibility to do their ministry and not be so stressed out.
Yeah.
And then obviously I look at the total budget. Goes back to, we don't want to spend more than we take in. So I'm trying to help watch and balance the overall budget and communicate to the staff on a regular basis where we're at. You know, where are we at on our 2 key percentages, and it helps them to know how to spend and how to manage their budget.
Okay, good. And by giving them that flexibility and that ownership, it keeps folks from over budgeting, just to make sure they have enough. You know, if they think it's only cost 500, they put 1,000 just to make sure. But when they know they can shift if needed, we can get closer to what we really think we need.
That's a great point. That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not just padding because they know they're going to just to cover themselves. With this philosophy, they can actually do accurate budgeting and know they have some flexibility.
Right. Okay.
Cool. Anyway, the monitoring the budget is really just communication. I've seen in some churches where the communication just wasn't there, and the staff members didn't know what were going on. They didn't know their cash flow position. You know, it's like a big secret. And I'm thinking we need to communicate that. And as I've done that, the staff members, you know, they go, thank you for letting us know where we're at on our budget. And I give them budget printouts of their department, you know, once a month. And then we meet about every 2 or 3 months at least and just go over it. You know,
do you do just kind of a random question? Do you do any type of training with onboarding with staff members or staff in general, maybe once a year, of here's the financial documents you're going to receive, and here's what they mean? Do you do that, or would you recommend that?
Yes, absolutely. No, I do that. Any staff member that's coming on board, that's part of the training. Is I print them a budget. And I explain this philosophy right here is we look at line items first, we look at departments second, and then we look at the total budget. And I explain the whatever report that you're printing out, you know, it's got all the different columns. You probably have month to date, and you have year to date, and you have a lot of columns. And I sit down and I explain to them what the columns say, what the percentages say, the over under, and make sure they know how to read their budget. Absolutely.
Okay.
Good point. Yeah, if we skip that, then we're just setting them up to fail, maybe.
Right.
All right, good question. So now we're going to get down, hopefully, in just budget promotion, how you promote budgets to the church, and then we'll get into some facility stuff. But I've always found, Nathan, that you just find the key numbers that your church wants to see each month. And everybody listening here has probably thrown out some stats in the bulletin or some numbers. And I just try to say, well, what are the key numbers that you really want them to see or that they really want to know? And then it just helps you be transparent. I always want to be as transparent as I possibly can to the church. And I put on that, you know, don't show them too little but don't show them too much either.
Right.
When you see the stats in the bulletin from some churches, some of them are so long and confusing. I don't think anybody really knows what they mean.
Right. It's kind of almost here's what offerings have been, and here's what we spent.
Yeah.
So it can be
make them simple.
Yeah.
And so be transparent. I put be consistent in your numbers. Is just always build your history and your trends using the same data. So when you see those, that they make sense. So find your numbers, be consistent, and use those. And I give you the two percentages that we talked about earlier, the two key metrics. I always throw those out in to the church even, and just say these are our two numbers. And it took a little bit of a training for that, in that explaining it, and even from the pulpit sometimes we say, hey, here's some new giving stats, here's what they mean. But I give them 5 or 6 numbers, and that's about all I give them.
Okay.
Just for promotion. But I think being transparent is one thing. Is if you're transparent enough, then they trust you more, and they go, well, they're giving us the right numbers, and they really want us to know how the church is doing.
Right. And ultimately it's their offerings. They need to know where they're going.
That's exactly right. I think that's true. And so you got to find that balance, Nathan, and just figure out in your church what are the numbers they're looking for, and not that you're going to give them everything they want, but find out what they like and what they want to see, and it will help them understand where the church is spending the money. And then hopefully by that they'll be better givers, knowing that you're going to, they've entrusted the money to you, and you're very transparent with them.
Okay. Good deal.
All right. As far as facility stuff, the next few minutes, I think we can, and please, I would consider you one of the gurus on this kind of stuff. You guys doing facility stuff, but I'll throw out what I've used and what's worked for me. But for budgeting for facilities,
and sorry, it was taking a little. There you go.
That's all right. I mean, these to me are the two main ones, obviously, that I always have in my budget. I always have a line item that's just general maintenance. We all have those, hopefully. That's your day-to-day stuff that you're repairing your facility with. It's typically small amounts, but it's you got to have some money in there for your facility manager and their team and the maintenance team to do their job. And that may be, as far as budgeting, you may have to look at history and trends of what you've normally spent.
Sure.
And use that as a guide of what you typically spend. I always also have a deferred maintenance line in my budget, and you can see that where it says using the life cycle chart. Hopefully, and I know you guys are really big on the life cycle charts.
Oh yes. In fact, if anybody's interested, we offer a free life cycle calculator that I hope that you have downloaded. If not, make sure you download it today for this exact reason, so that you can use it to actually look at what costs that you might be experiencing and when it's going to come due. Because again, if you're not putting money aside into that reserve account, when your boiler breaks, you're either going to have to take out a loan or you pay cash. It depends on how you've been preparing for the inevitability.
That's exactly right. So my deferred maintenance is, I put on there budget to repair or replace something every year. I mean, I think that's what you guys preach and have taught is you have your life cycle chart. And I know those are large sometimes and hard to put together, but bottom line to me, Nathan, is you got to be repairing and replacing something.
Oh, absolutely. Everything wears. Yeah, everything's going to start wearing. So I know I'm not in as good a shape as I was 20 years ago. So we see it personally. We know it. We recognize it. It takes effort. It takes maintenance. It takes funding to maintain.
Yeah, I like what you guys always say. So guess what? Your facility gets older every day.
Yeah. It's.
Oh man, I didn't know that, Nathan.
Yep. Time marches on. So
put a line item, build it if you can, put a deferred maintenance, and knowing that you're going to replace something, it could be in facilities, it can be in computers, it can be whatever that you're doing, but at least budget some money that you're at least starting that process, and hopefully that grows. The general maintenance, so to speak, is pretty much the same as long as you're got the same size facility and stuff, but your deferred maintenance, hopefully that's growing each year in your budget. Somehow you can add more money in there for that, because that way you can replace more things each year.
It's almost ideal is putting enough aside in a reserve account in your deferred maintenance in your life cycle, so that the amount of money that you're putting in is covering the amount of money that you're having to expend each year, and it's zero. So almost down to a zero based budget, because you're accounting for everything that's there. And thank you. I just noticed Julie here. She sent to everybody the life cycle calculator link. So, and if I need to have a webinar going over how to do and helping set up the life cycle calculator, if y'all get on the forums at CFMS and request it, I'll set one up and get it out there. So sorry,
that would be awesome. I think that'd be awesome to do. Well, that's my two key ones that I always make sure and have those in my budget for sure. And sometimes trying to get that across to the stewardship or finance team, they're looking at other stuff, but I'm the one that's going to champion facilities and property, so I want to make sure those get funded properly.
Yeah, as Tim says, churches, buildings, facilities don't grow churches. But if you're going to have a facility, you better make sure you're taking care of it. You've been entrusted it. So
absolutely.
It's been entrusted to you. So that's why we take care of them. God said take care of his stuff. So we're stewards. Let's do that.
Yes, we want our buildings to look excellent. We want them to look, we want them to be safe. We want them to be operational, and we want them to look nice.
Yep.
So the next slide, Nathan, is just I put some key facility budget items, maybe some other stuff that you may not be thinking of that I always try to get into my budget is like, for instance, maintenance contracts. You're going to have those. If you outsource your cleaning or different things, you're going to have some maintenance contracts, lawn care, all that kind of stuff for your facilities. Is make sure that you have a line item in there to cover all of your contracts that you may have. And I always say review those annually. Meet with your contractors and your vendors and try to get the best deal that you can for the church, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only review them, but make sure you are monitoring them throughout the year, because you're paying for it. People's offering or paying for those contracts. They need to be met. The conditions need to be met. That's for their.
Yeah, I tell you what, I've saved so much money on facilities through maintenance contracts just by sitting down with the guy and saying, what are you providing? What are you doing for the church? And let's get the best deal that we can. I found that some maintenance contracts that sit idle, no one ever looks at them, that the price goes up and you never even know it.
Right. Or the work's not being performed and you're paying for it.
Right, exactly.
So always
Big
check
deal.
that.
Transportation is another one that I always make sure you put that in your budget. It's kind of like the life cycle thing. If you have a large fleet, which a lot of churches do, have 4 or 5, 6 vehicles or vans or buses, is to budget in there to upgrade or replace something in your fleet every year. Budget that in your transportation. You want to either upgrade your vehicles, keep them well maintained, or maybe even if they're older, replace one every year or two. So put that in your budget. IT, stuff is never ending, right?
Right. You'll never be done. That's a rolling account.
It's a rolling, so make sure you put an IT line item in your facility budget. You're always going to have to upgrade something or replace a computer or software or sound systems, microphones. So I always make sure I have an IT budget. Another one is property insurance. Obviously you're going to budget for it, but you may even want to make it a separate line item. It's just property insurance and I always bid that out at least every 2 to 3 years. I'm bidding that out. It's a large job to bid out because you have to have so much detail about your building, but it can serve you well if you throw that out to bid. And then the last one that I wanted to talk about real quick is just safety team. You know, Nathan, it seems like, I don't see if I'm right on this, it seems like over the last 4 or 5 years, safety and safety teams has become very, very, are more popular in churches.
It is. It's a relatively new kind of budgetary concern. We teach and I teach on safety and security in the church, and I make the point that if you're serious about safety and security, it will have a line item. We're serious about what we put in the budget because we name it. We name it and we claim it. So if you're serious about security, you're serious about safety, it will have a line item that says this is what we're spending. This is what we're putting towards the safety and security of our folks. What it includes depends on your safety and security program.
Sure.
But and it also needs to be done in conjunction with property insurance and that bidding process to make sure anything that you do in that realm is covered by the other. That's important when you're putting out those bids every a couple years. And hey, once you gather all the data of your facility, it's easy to just update it every other year.
That's true.
But yeah, it is becoming big, and more people realize that if they're serious about it, they will need to actually put dollars towards it. Can't tell you how much.
I wanted to throw that out there because it seems to be new and upcoming, and we may forget to put that in our properties budget. Anyway, that's on that. Yeah, that next slide showed those. Those are just some key facility budget items that I thought we should at least, throw out there. Are we still got time for one more? Are we good on time? Or this next slide? Are we still there? I think I lost you, Nathan.
Rick, you've got me. Sorry.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Yep. So, folks, if you have to drop off, we understand. At the hour mark, we've got time to cover this last slide. We will make the recording available on CFMS under the resources later as well. But yeah, we've got time. Let's talk about capital expenses.
Yeah, last slide, we did pretty good. As Nathan, one of the biggest questions that I've even had already in my budget process is the IT guy comes and he says, well, how do I handle big capital expenditures that I know I'm going to need next year? A new soundboard or whatever it is, because you can't budget for that hardly. So I wanted to throw out two things quickly. Is the capital expenses is for those large expenses that you just can't find a way to fit them in the budget. You're talking $30,000-$40,000 maybe, and this is beyond the life cycle budgets. But you may have remodels, you may have some AV upgrades, some IT stuff. So here's just two ways I've seen in other churches and that I've used. Is the number one is to create a future building fund and actually add that in your budget. This is something that you can. It may be $1,000 a month. It could be $2,000. It could be whatever. But put that in your budget. And what you don't spend, or if you don't spend it, is transfer it or carry it over into a designated fund. You're essentially just paying yourself each month, and that can accumulate that way. So if you put in $2,000 a month and it's $24,000, and you're probably going to need more than that. I'm just using that for an example. But put that aside, put that money aside for you that carries over each budget year. You don't lose it, and what you don't spend, you can accumulate. That we do that here and we do that for future building, future transportation. We know we're going to have to replace some vans and vehicles, so we budget a small amount each year, and we're just accumulating that and setting it aside for our own restricted fund, so to speak. It may take a year or two to get that, but at least you're working towards accumulating some large funds.
Right. So
that's one way. The second one is the last one. Just sometimes we have a lot of needs and a lot of things, but we just don't have the money for them, and so we don't do anything. right?
Right.
When I learned this at one of the churches I was at many years ago, but we built us a list, a capital needs list, and everybody was going, "Why are you creating these lists? We don't have any money." And I go, we will have some money someday, and when we have that money, I want to know where we want to spend it and what's our priority. And we put together a large, about an 8-page document, and basically we went around our facility and we looked at what are the worst places, the worst looking places that have the highest traffic, right?
Right.
And we wrote down all the needs that we had in our church, and we created us a list, and then we spent some time with our building and grounds committee on our finance committee of prioritizing those needs and say, if and when we have dollars and we have donations or money to cover this, where would we start? What would we do first? And so it's just good to have that list built and be ready and prepared.
Right. It's knowing that, like you said, you're going to have excess funds at some point, more than likely, but it also helps you as you're doing future planning. If you have a list of where you would like to go or what you need to improve,
Right.
I always kind of describe it as, or the way I approached it was, I never like to spend money twice in the same spot.
Yeah.
And so I would look as to where I needed to do improvements and try to then tie additional project work and things to that. But the only way you can do that is know where you need to improve. And to do that walk around is to take a look at your facility, find out what you need to do, because you may find that for a ministry, you need to create a more accessible route. Well, at the same time, if you know that you need to do some sidewalk repair, rather than splitting it up, there's some cost savings combining work, so a contractor can spend more time on facility. So there you go.
Absolutely.
But if you've got that list,
just
you
being
can be
ready
proactive.
and prepared. I was at a church that we had so many needs and so much facility needs that everybody's going, I don't even know where to start. Nathan, I go, I don't even know where to start. I go, well, let's build a list. Let's find out what would be our priority. And then within about 2 years, Nathan, we actually funded almost 90% of those projects just through some giving donations, and we publicized that to the church. We said, here's our capital list need. Here's what our facility needs. And we actually had people donate towards some of the projects.
Right. It's the advantage of the open, the communicating, and transparency.
Absolutely.
We walk through it every day.
Bathrooms, we upgraded, HVAC. We did a lot of stuff, and it was just by being proactive and letting the church know these are our needs and we're aware of them. Anyway, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity today to speak and share. I hope that helped some of them.
I appreciate your time. I appreciate what we've been able to do here. And folks, again, we will make sure that it is on the website for you. If anybody has any questions before we go ahead and sign off, shoot them in real quick. If not, know that we will have, you can always email us, training@coolsolutionsgroup.com. You can post a question on the forum, cfms.cool. You can check all that out. Get with us. We want you to have this information. We'll get examples of the spreadsheet that we talked about earlier, kind of that weekly deal to put out. And we will make the slide deck available for y'all to go back and refer. And so all that being said, that's kind of all the housekeeping. I do want to remind you that next month, we've got a webinar on cleaning. What does it take to get your facility clean? Then the next one after that is going to be on roofing. And then we'll continue on and we'll start getting those out to you so you can sign up and make arrangements. But Rick, I want to thank you again for your time and your experience and expertise on the budgeting and sharing with us today about the different way to budget and kind of the things that go into that. So thank you.
Great. I enjoyed it. It's great. Thank you so much for the invite.
All right, you are so welcome. And we do have one quick question that came in, if you're willing. we'll talk about this. It's what's a good way to find good maintenance contractors. I can tell you one way you can start a little bit on our vetted vendors page. Yes, I'm talking about cfms.cool, but hey, that's what I do. We've got some folks there that are working with churches. The next step, and Rick, chime in if you got more to add, but I always say make sure they meet with you and they walk your facility before they give you a proposal.
Absolutely.
And you can start looking with, and if you want to get references, depending on where you're at, you can call hospitals, universities, or other large commercial properties to find out who they're using to clean if they're outsourcing or doing maintenance. Because they've got similar equipment as most churches do, because churches are commercial properties. So you're looking for folks who understand commercial equipment. So
right. I always look for referrals or people that I know that have used them. And I'm like you, Nathan. I always sit down and meet with each vendor, and because I want them to become a partner with me. I want them to understand how I operate, and I want them to know what my goal and my expectations are up front. And if they're willing to partner and to do that and be proactive with me, then they're probably going to be a really good vendor.
That is right. And again, it's all about the communication and making sure that that transparency is there, just for the maintenance contracts as well as the for the church and the budgeting. So if there are no further questions, if anybody else has one, let us know. If not, thank you all very much. Appreciate it. We ran a little long, but thank you so very much. And we appreciate your time on this webinar. And thank you again, Rick. I really appreciate it.
All right, everybody have a great day, great weekend.
All right, y'all. Yep. Have a great services this week, everybody.